We live in a wonderful world, a world crowded with beauty, a world of grandeur, mystery. Yes, this is a wonderful world, but perhaps the greatest wonder of all is man himself. His body is a marvel of mechanical efficiency and adaptability. The body has a chemical plant, far more complex and efficient than any man has ever built. It transforms the food we eat into flesh and blood and bones and teeth. And the body has a heating system, a living furnace that we stoke daily with food for fuel. As this fuel is oxidized, heat and energy are provided for the body machine. In winter, we're kept warm by this remarkable system. And in the summer, we're kept cool by the body's own cooling system, which is so efficient it can prevent our body temperature from rising for a limited time, even in heat that will fry a steak. An automatic thermostat controls both our heating and our cooling systems, keeping our temperature at a normal 98.6 degrees, except when a higher temperature is needed to combat disease. More than the greatest ever constructed by man. The body's telephone system transmits millions of messages every day with never a busy signal or wrong number. Man-made machines require lubrication from an outside source, but the body manufactures its own lubricant in just the right grade and the right amount for every part. Yes, the body is wonderful. The hand, for example, is a marvel of mechanical adaptability. It can perform a multitude of tasks. Oh, man has been able to make a mechanical hand that will feed a printing press, but that hand can't thread a needle, or perform an operation, or paint a picture. The human hand can perform all these activities and thousands more. There's no doubt but what man needed a hand just like this. But was the need alone enough to bring it into existence? Still more wonderful is the human eye. The camera, man's nearest mechanical approach to the eye, resembles it in many ways. For any camera, whether it's a tiny model small enough to fit into your vest pocket, or a giant aerial camera, has a lens, similar in design and function to the lens of the human eye. Sometimes the eye lens becomes damaged or clouded and requires surgery. And here, in an actual operation, the eye lens is removed, and we see what a perfect little optical instrument it is. The eye functions far more efficiently than the lens of the most expensive camera. When a lens is focused on an object at a given distance and that distance is changed, the object becomes blurred, and the lens must be refocused to the new distance. In the camera, this focusing must be done by hand, but in the eye, it's automatic. Strong muscles change the focus thousands of times each day without a thought on our part. The camera also has a means for controlling the amount of light that reaches the film, an iris diaphragm, copied from and named after the iris of the human eye, which automatically changes according to light. Now, the pictures the eye gives us are not black and white. They're color pictures. And they're not stills. They're motion pictures. And they're not silent. They're sound pictures. Do you know that the music you're hearing is being played all over again on a perfect little musical instrument inside your ear? We think of the sound as being produced by the piano. And of course, in one sense, it is. But actually, the piano is as silent as a tomb and is merely producing vibrations in the air. As the keys are struck, felt hammers strike the strings, causing them to vibrate, each at its own frequency. The vibrating strings set the air pulsating to the same frequencies. These pulsations are transmitted to the outer ear, down the auditory canal, and through the mechanical linkage of the middle ear to the cochlea, which is all rolled up like a cockleshell. If the cochlea could be stretched out, we would discover a musical instrument similar to the piano, but far more wonderful and complex. The ear has more than 24,000 strings. These two notes are as close as any the piano can produce. But the ear's piano can produce 10 tones between these two and more than 1,500 different tones altogether. When the piano is played, the ear's remarkable little keyboard plays the same tones and sends corresponding signals along individual lines to the brain. Of course, the outer ear operates in air, but the cochlea is filled with a liquid. The transmission of sound from air to a liquid is one of the most difficult problems, but in the ear, this problem is beautifully solved by the mechanical preciseness of the middle ear, with its 2 diaphragms of just the right size and 3 connecting bones with the exact leverage required. The eardrum is like a piston. It has an area of 90 square millimeters. The smaller diaphragm an area of 3.2 square millimeters. Diaphragms must be joined by a mechanical leverage of 2 to 1. In the ear, these tiny bones, the ossicles, are exactly right for the job. They are a fixed size that must not change from the cradle to the grave. The little fellow has a lot of growing to do before he's as big as Dad. All the bones in his body must grow and develop. All, that is, but the ossicles of his ears. They have to be the right size at the start and never change throughout life. These are the actual bones from the ear of an adult and a child. Can it be just an accident that they are the only bones in a baby's body that do not grow, that are fully developed at birth? The ear is one of the most efficient sound detectors known to man, capable of hearing the roar of a cannon, or the rustle of leaves, and under ideal conditions, even the footfalls of a cat. But at the University of California at Los Angeles, there is a place where we can hear sounds so soft that the footfalls of a cat would seem deafening by comparison. Deep in the sub-basement of the physics building, far below the surface of the Earth, is a most unusual room where it is possible to study the amazing sensitivity of the human ear. Here we find ourselves shut off from extraneous outside noises, surrounded by prisms of spun glass that absorb incidental sounds such as our own breathing. It takes time for our senses to become adjusted to the absence of familiar sounds in this strange environment. But before long, we hear noises we never really heard before. The sound of air molecules beating against our eardrums. The sound of our heart pounding against our ribs. Did you ever see a living, beating human heart? A rare operation enables us to see this marvelous little pump. It pumps 12 pints of blood through hundreds of thousands of miles of blood vessels every minute, and in one day pumps enough blood to fill a large gasoline truck to overflowing. During a lifespan, it would fill a string of tank cars 50 miles long and beat 2.5 million times without a single shutdown for repairs. Have you ever wondered what goes on in the brain of a homing pigeon? Somewhere within its tiny head is locked a secret no man has ever solved. A secret that enables it to take to the air long distances from home, circle about a few minutes and get its bearings in some mysterious way, and then fly straight home over long miles of unfamiliar territory. Because of the pigeon's strange homing ability, pigeon raising has become a popular hobby. This hand-fed youngster doesn't look much like the expert flyer he will someday be. And yet, even at this early age, he's banded with a number that will identify him through racing days. As soon as the young are able to fly, they are released from the home loft on daily training flight. Like athletes, they must build up their speed and endurance through many weeks of strenuous training. The training flights are short at first, with the birds circling about overhead only a few minutes and then returning to the landing porch. But as they grow older and stronger, they're ready for longer flights and are transported many miles from the home loft. Here they are released to wing their way home over a path they have never seen. Then, at last, the 500-mile race. The birds are watered just before dawn to sustain them on their long journey home. And at sunrise, Pigeondom's greatest race classic gets underway as thousands of experienced flyers take to the air. No one ever taught these birds the way home. No one ever showed them the path they should take. And yet, so unerringly do they wing their way across hundreds of unfamiliar miles that the time of their arrival home can be predicted almost exactly. But pigeons are small-time operators compared with the Pacific golden plover, a bird rarely seen outside of our field museums. This feathered globetrotter flies so far it needs 2 suits of clothes, one for Arctic weather and the other for tropical wear. It lives and mates in eastern Siberia and Alaska, but it winters in the Hawaiian Islands. In late summer, the adult birds make the long migration journey, traveling 2,000 miles over open sea. Without stopping for food or rest, they fly unerringly to these pinpoint islands in the vast Pacific. Junior's left at home because he's too young to make the trip. But many weeks later, as soon as he's able to fly, he too feels the urge to migrate, and he sets out for a goal he has never seen. To reach it, he must fly 2,000 miles over an unmarked. They've never made the trip before either. But what prompts the golden plover to set out for a place he has never seen? Just think what would happen if navigation were off and he missed those tiny islands. The migration flight of the American plover is even more amazing. It travels from northern Canada to Labrador and then across 2,000 miles of pathless seas without a stop and on down to Argentina. The journey home is by a different route. And again, the young, making the trip for the first time, fly these thousands of miles unaccompanied by any bird that has ever made the trip before. But the greatest migrant of all is the Arctic tern. Starting from within 8 degrees of the North Pole, it spans more than 11,000 miles in a record-breaking flight to the South Pole. After a brief period within the Antarctic Circle, it makes the long return trip, to complete the world's longest migration flight, 22,000 miles over unfamiliar land and sea. To keep a modern plane on its course requires an array of complicated instruments, charts, plotters, and celestial navigation equipment.
Long Beach, clear, scattered clouds at 3,500, visibility 8, temperature 60, dew point 48, altimeter 2988, winds west-southwest 13.
Clover Tower, this is NC 275. Landing instructions, please. Over.
NC 275, this is Clover Tower, runway 30, cleared to land.
Clover Tower, NC 275, turning final. What is it in this tiny head that all the ingenuity of man cannot duplicate? Say, what's this? Something out of a nightmare? Could be if you dream of bats. The bat is a mysterious creature, the only mammal that flies. Like other mammals, it bears its young alive and suckles them at its breast. This is typical bat country. Only a bat could feel at home here, but rents are reasonable and bat apartments easy to find. That is, for bats they are. But scientists spend long hours searching for the bat hideouts. And the main object of their interest, the bat's remarkable abilities in flight. At dusk, final preparations are made for technical studies at the spots where the bats have been located. As the bats emerge in search of food, important information for future analysis is obtained. And then our official bat catcher swings into action, in order that some of the bats may be taken to the laboratory for closer study. At the Moody Institute of Science, the bats quickly become adjusted to their new environment. Normally, these bats feed on insects they catch on the wing. But in the lab, they'll settle for anything we can dig up. Mickey was an orphan when we found him, but he quickly became the lab pet. Somehow he had his own ideas about food. Even a doll's nursing bottle wasn't much of an attraction at first. But it wasn't long before Mickey felt right at home with his bottle. And in a few short days, the two were inseparable. But life isn't all worms and nursing bottles in a science lab. There's work to be done, even for bats. These bats never served in the Army, but they know what an obstacle course is. The bat's wingspread far exceeds the space between the crossbars. Only clever maneuvering will permit him to fly between them. As the bat is released, we cross our fingers and hope he'll do what the book says. Now, watch this. Bats are not blind. They have eyes and they can see. But the key to the bat's success in avoiding obstacles is not his ability to see. To prove it, we'll blindfold him and put him through another test. Blindfolded, he dodges those bars just as skillfully as he did before. But how does he do it? Well, science knows that bats emit strange cries in flight. They can't be picked up by the ordinary microphone. They're far beyond the range of the human ear. But a very special high-frequency amplifier tuned to 32,000 cycles for this particular bat translates these inaudible sounds into sounds we can hear. Through numerous experiments, science learned that the bat's ears are extremely sensitive to high-pitched sounds. And the question arose, can the bat's own cries be signals that guide it in flight? Well, let's tie the bat's mouth closed so he can't make these sounds and see what happens. Incidentally, here's the only creature we know that can get into trouble by keeping his mouth shut. Science has proved conclusively that bats are guided in flight by echoes of their signal cries. Why, that's actually a kind of radar. Man's radar takes tons of equipment and a large crew of men to operate it. But the bat carries its remarkable radar around in its head. Radar that guides it safely through the intense darkness of the caves, that keeps it from colliding with obstacles it cannot see, or with the thousands of other bats flying through the same darkness. How did the bat learn to use radar so many ages before it was even a dream in the mind of man? Where did the bat get such marvelous equipment? Obviously, this is all a part of an intelligent plan, but whose intelligence? The bat's? If we were to visit the beaches of Southern California on certain spring and summer evenings, we'd find them dotted with campfires. But the people around these fires are not picnickers. Believe it or not, these folks are fishing. Yes, grunion fishing. And by tradition, the hot dogs and the marshmallows are all a part of this unusual sport. But now it's H hour on grunion night. And here comes the lookout shouting, "Hey, grunion, come on, come on!" And they're off in the strangest sport on earth. But wait a minute. Where's the fishing tackle? You can't fish without poles or nets, or can you? It looks like all you need for this kind of fishing is a reckless enthusiasm and a good boarding house grab. Oh, yes, and a bucket. You'd really have some fun trying to carry an armload of these fellas. Yes, and dry clothes to go home in are a must for grunion fishermen. Because in the excitement, something like this always seems to happen. Fish out of water. Yes, and these fish haven't been washed up on the beach by accident. They deliberately come out of the water to lay their eggs on shore. The only fish in the world that spawn on land. Fish nesting on land. One of the rarest of all biological phenomena. A spectacle so unique it can be witnessed nowhere in the world except on a few Southern California beaches. Fish depend upon water for life, just as we depend upon air. And yet, at the very risk of its life, the grunion comes out of the water into this foreign, hostile environment. Here, the female digs into the sand, tail first, and lays her eggs. Once they are fertilized, the desperate struggle for survival begins. If she misses the next wave, she has little chance to survive. The eggs are always laid when the water is far up on the beach. Then, night after night, the waters recede until they reach the lowest tide. By then, the eggs may be hundreds of feet from the water's edge, far from the element in which the fish must eventually live. Here the eggs develop, lying buried in the warm, moist sand. On the beaches of Southern California in the early spring or summer, it's possible to find these eggs by digging almost anywhere along the high tide line. Careful searching uncovers tiny pockets of these brightly colored eggs. In the photomicrographic laboratory of the Moody Institute of Science, the embryonic development, which normally takes place under the sand, is studied with the microscope. These eggs were fertilized only seconds ago, and now one is being prepared for observation. Within this tiny egg, a miracle is about to take place. With the aid of the lapsed time photomicrographic equipment, which compresses days into seconds on the screen, we will be able to witness this amazing spectacle, the magical unfolding of life through cell division. The first faint stirrings of life come when the blastodermal cap, seen in the circle, divides into two separate cells. In about 30 minutes, the second cleavage becomes evident, resulting in 4 cells. Successive divisions produce 8, 16, 32, 64, and so on up into the hundreds of thousands of cells. This formless cluster is actually a fish in the making. It contains all the characteristics of the adult grunion: its size, its shape, its habits, yes, even the germ of that mysterious wisdom by which it will someday be able to perfectly time its spawning with the movement of the tides. Food for the growing embryonic fish is supplied by numerous globules of oil in the center of the egg. With every surge, the cells divide until eventually there will be millions upon millions of them, each having just as much claim to being the original cell as any of the millions of others. And yet they're all different. Soon they will take their place in the various parts of the body as bones and blood and scales and fins. Out of this indistinguishable mass of cells in some mysterious, unknown way, the form of a fish is building up around an invisible, intangible framework. But where is the mold or the pattern that is shaping these cells into a living creature? The first recognizable features are the head and the eyes. And the first action of the fish, controlled by its newly formed muscles, is revealed by the lapse time camera as a series of convulsive jerks. The head and the eyes are more plainly visible now. And on the opposite side of the egg, the tail is beginning to form. At this stage of its growth, the embryonic fish is 4 days old. The head and the eyes are well formed now, and the simple heart already at work can be seen. After 8 to 10 days, the egg is ready to hatch. But remember, when it does, it will be a fish. If it were to hatch while buried here in the sand, far from the water, it wouldn't have a chance in the world to live. But the grunion egg never hatches until the water reaches it, and then it hatches instantly. Now, you can keep these eggs buried in the sand for weeks or months, and they won't hatch. But now let's pour some salt water on them and see what happens. This mysterious hatching of the egg is just as definitely connected with the movement of the tides as is the spawning. There are two main tides which have their peak at the full and the dark of the moon. This complex pattern represents the rise and fall of the daily tides over a period of a month. Suppose the eggs were laid any night before the peak tide. A higher tide the following night would wash them out of the sheltering sand and expose them to their enemies. Or, if they were laid on a night too long after the peak, they would be washed out by a rising tide just a few nights later, before they had a chance to develop. Actually, there are only a few nights when the grunion can lay her eggs successfully, when the tide is at its peak, or the first few nights after the peak. And she must choose not only the right night, but the right hour of that night. Or even if she should lay her eggs on the right night, but when the tide is still rising, they would be washed out by that very tide. Or if she should wait too long after the peak and lay her eggs while that night's tide is receding, they would be washed out by the rising tide of the next night and destroyed. Only during this magic hour can the eggs be laid where they will grow and develop safely. But that isn't all. For during this hour, certain waves are higher than others. So the grunion has to choose not only the right month, the right night of that month, and the right hour of that night, but when the right wave during that hour. Terrible and treacherous are the tides. The story of their treachery is told in warning markers along many a fog-bound rocky coast. No sea captain can guide his vessel safely without a knowledge of the tide. But the grunion possesses a far better knowledge of the tides than the most experienced mariner, and is able to turn these tides, so destructive to man, to its own advantage, and by them preserve its very life and the life of its young. Remember that first garden you had when you were a youngster? You planted the seeds and covered them so carefully. You rather expected the plants to pop out of the ground like this, but somehow it didn't work out quite that way. And as you waited, you got to wondering, well, maybe I planted those seeds upside down. Well, is there a right and a wrong end to a seed? On opening a bean seed, we find that the embryonic root points in a definite direction. This determines the direction of initial growth. So it is possible to plant a seed upside down. But no matter which way the seed is placed in the ground, the plant always grows in the right direction. Even if we try to fool the growing seed, it doesn't get mixed up. The root reverses it. If we turn a growing plant on its side, the stem will grow upward, even if it has to bend at right angles to do so. Of course, the root grows down, because down is the logical place to find water. But if it encounters a dry region like the red area, it limits its growth to the area of moisture. Now, the shoot grows up because up is the logical place to find the light it must have. But if light can't be found by growing upward, the shoot will grow in any direction to reach it, even if it has to detour through a small hole to get there. Plant two seeds at the same time. Grow one in the light, the other in the dark. The one in the light soon has well-developed leaves, but the one in the dark has wasted no energy in developing leaves, which would be useless in the dark. It has expended all of its energy in a frantic effort to reach the light. This is the principle that causes a tree to defy the law of gravity. Have you ever paused to consider the enormous forces at work in a single tree? This tree is probably the oldest living thing on earth. It was almost 2,000 years old when Christ was born. For 3,800 years, This tree has been lifting at least 10 tons of water each day to its top, a total of more than 10 trillion foot-pounds of work. It is evident that there is an infinite power behind the mystery of life. But is this a blind, unintelligent, impersonal force? Well, you've been thinking, haven't you? That's all right. Don't feel embarrassed. It's a good thing. It's good to think once in a while about things like where you came from and why you're here, maybe about where you're going. Now about that matter of origin. No doubt you formed some opinion as to where you came from. Well, let's look at it this way. Suppose that you've never seen and you've never heard of a watch. Then one day you find one. You're intrigued by its appearance and by that strange sound it makes. If you're anything like the rest of us, it isn't long before you have the back off trying to find out what makes it tick. Now you're still more intrigued with the intricate wonders of that mechanism. If you're observant, it isn't long before you notice that there's a definite relationship between the movement of those hands and the passage of time. You discover that you have a useful article. But now you've got to explain the origin of the watch. Well, you might develop the theory that the watch just happened, especially if you were trying to convince yourself that nobody owned the watch. You could argue that the atoms and the molecules of the various parts just got together by accident. But the simplest kind of reasoning should tell you that somebody made those parts. Somebody put them together for a purpose. Well, how about that eye with its automatic focus and light control? Or that tiny musical instrument inside the human ear? Or that heart with its endless capacity for work? Or the bat with its radar magic? Or the directional wizardry of birds in flight? Or the grunion egg with its tiny cells building life about a ghost-like frame? Or the seeking wonder of growing things? Is all this the product of blind chance? You know, when you come right down to it, there are only two views we can take. Either this all happened by accident, or it's the result of design and plan. You might just shrug your shoulders and say, well, it's just a matter of personal opinion, and let it go at that. You might, that is, but for the fact that this is an issue which vitally affects your whole life. It's going to determine how you think and how you live. For after all, if man is just an accident, then he has no responsibility except that responsibility is upon himself. There's no law but the law of convenience and desire. There's no ultimate right or wrong. And when people think and live according to that philosophy, the result is chaos. But if, on the other hand, there's a plan, then there's a planner. If there's a design, there's a designer. In other words, there's a God. You know, it isn't hard to believe in a God. It's the simplest and the most logical thing in the world. Oh, I know that some people are honestly confused by the maze of conflicting arguments. I guess maybe they just try to make the thing too hard. But for a lot of people, the problem gets complicated only when they begin to worry about who owns the watch. In other words, believing in God involves a responsibility, and they don't want that responsibility. They don't want anybody telling them what's right or what's wrong or how to live or act, not even the God who made them. But when you get as many people as there are in the world today living and acting as if there were no God, it's no wonder the world's in a mess. When we see the results of unbelief, it doesn't seem at all far-fetched to say that the only hope for the world as a whole, or for you as an individual, is faith in God. Not just belief in a supreme being or a great force, but belief in a personal God who loved you enough to provide a salvation for you. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life.